Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. From Peterson's, I'm your host, Taylor Sienkiewicz, and you're listening to You Have a Cool Job, a podcast highlighting those who took their profession in a unique direction and what they did to get there. On this week's episode of You Have a Cool Job, we talked to Shari O'Loughlin. Sheree is the executive director of the Children's Grief Center of New Mexico. Despite the fact that Sheree deals with loss and tragedy, she couldn't be more positive and ready to help and connect with others. To start, I asked Sheree about the role of the Grief Center and her role as director.
So we're the Children's Grief Center of New Mexico, and our mission is to support children and their families who have lost a loved one. So the incidence and impact is actually a little bit higher than people might imagine. It is an adverse child experience, or an ACE, as it's called. But in New Mexico, about 1 in 10 kids will lose a parent or a sibling before the age of 18. So that's pretty significant bereavement, and that affects pretty large numbers. But it's not something as a society we always recognize as difficult and as risky of a situation as it is for kids. So kids and teens do have higher risks that come with that, but when it's supported through the groups that we run and the programs that we run, they have the opportunity to transform that journey, which is very painful and has to be managed, into something that is positive and takes them to a different place and makes them able to find hope and a path forward now, but also invest in stronger, more resilient citizens and adults down the road.
Okay. And in that support, what are some of your main goals in short-term and long-term?
Absolutely. So we work, there's actually about 300 children's grief organizations across the country, which most people may not know. And we work under the umbrella of the National Alliance for Grieving Children, which is a national organization that we learn best practices and have research and standards for operating so that we know how to do our jobs best and what really works. And a lot of it is based on some work by William Worden. He's a PhD from Harvard. And if you think about Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, that's one model on how to work with grief, but it often more impacts adults, and it's more about, it was originated for people who were dying and leaving this world. And William Worden's work is a little more updated and applicable to people who are the survivors of bereavement and are experiencing that. And there's 4 premises that underlie the research he's done on what's most helpful to children and that underlie the work that we do. And that's that the first step is understanding what happens. A lot of times with tragic loss, people want to, in honor of the kids and to help them, want to sugarcoat that, but that's actually pretty damaging because down the road, when they get older and learn more information about what happened, they can have a betrayal and loss of trust in addition to the bereavement. So we work with helping kids understand the reality of death, to feel the feelings. That's the second part, that they actually have a right to feel all of the myriad of feelings that come with that. The third thing is to learn a way to memorialize their loved one, to make a special space that they can take their person forward with them and have a special relationship with them after they've passed away. And then the last one is how to create a new future and move forward with a new life they didn't ask for, wouldn't have wanted, but is what their life is and can be made more positive and happy again. So we help them find hope. We help them find resiliency. We provide a community of other people so they don't feel so alone in that process, and so that they can work with others as they move forward to find new steps in their life.
Okay. And when you talked about the risks for these kids, what are you referring to?
So kids who've experienced significant bereavement are at much higher risk for unhealthy coping techniques, including using drugs, including addictions, and turning to things that certainly are risk factors for all teenagers but are magnified during that time. There's a connection with criminal behavior as well that starts small but often can magnify, and there's been some really interesting studies of convicted adults and a very high percentage, about 96%, lost someone when they were young, before the age of 18, had significant bereavement. So that's a risk factor. Problems in school, both with attendance and performance. Problems forming trusting relationships, which are obviously important on a personal level, but also a work level. So there's all sorts of higher risk factors that, when we can teach them different ways to support their pain, different ways to move forward, we can change that to a supportive opportunity for them so that we mitigate those risk factors.
Okay, that makes sense. So, Sheree, what inspires you to do this, despite these topics being pretty emotionally heavy?
They are. People often say, "What do you do?" and why? It's interesting. I grew up in the age, I was a bereaved sibling, young, and I grew up in the age where the resounding philosophy was pull yourself up by your bootstraps, take down the pictures, don't talk about it. The faster you move on, the less pain you will have. And so I understand that's not helpful at all. If you ask anybody over the ages, probably about 45 or 40, who may have experienced that in our cultural belief, they will say the same thing. It's just, that's a pain that's unresolved, and it's a pain you carry with you into your adulthood. And anything that's unresolved continues to create problems for you down the road. A couple more, the risk factors are anger and depression and eating disorders and anxiety. And even those things can come out in adults decades later after traumatic loss. I also am a bereaved parent, and that was life-changing for me to experience that, but in addition to that, what I learned through using this organization, that's how I was connected initially, is that when it's supported, the outcome can be different. So what inspires me is to make sure that bereaved children have that opportunity to have support, because I understand the lifelong experience of it. It's not something that just goes away because decades pass, but when it's supported, we can really transform that energy into something positive. And I'm amazed at the resiliency I see in our kids and our families here at the Grief Center, and that inspires me every day to make sure there's access to our services for so many more kids.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know you had such opposite experiences with that. That makes sense for what you're doing.
Oh, amazing. And when I look at my parents, who had zero support in some ways, which was very typical of society. It wasn't cruelty, it was just a different belief about how we worked with that. And when I look at their experience of having no support and trying to raise surviving siblings, I know the difference and the impact that it can make. And really, as a society, we don't like to talk about, in our Western culture here in the United States, we don't like to talk about hard stuff, but what I have found time and time again is it's not our strengths and our amazing experiences that connect us, which is what we often think. It's really our vulnerabilities. And when we talk with other people, it's astounding how many others have had some kind of experience, and just being able to share that, share what works, share what doesn't work, being heard through that experience makes an incredible difference on the trajectory of a person's life. And so I love being a catalyst for that to happen in the world, and for people to come back and say, wow, I didn't know I could talk about this, and I didn't know I could actually feel better after talking about this, and I do. Thank you.
Sheree wasn't always involved with the Children's Grief Center, as her background is actually in the for-profit world of business and consulting. But the tragic loss of her son brought her and her family to the Grief Center. She volunteered at the center after being positively impacted by it, until eventually landing in her current position. When we lost
Connor, when the accident happened, I was the chief operating officer for a technology company, and the company was wonderful, the people were wonderful, but it was just very hard to take that experience in my life and go back to work to try to sell a new technology in the world. I couldn't make a connection, a heart connection to that, and it didn't make sense to me anymore. So I didn't really know what that would look like, but that's what the changes would look like, but that's how I started my consulting company. Mm-hmm. And I did general business consulting from my work background, my educational work background for years, but I also specialized in grief work for executives who had significant bereavement, because from my experience, I had to go back to work and lead other people and when I couldn't even, speak a sentence without crying or walk through a day with being able to breathe. So I wanted to be able to, as a coach, work with executives and other professionals who had similar experiences like that to find their new path, which often means transforming and finding something else in life that really is meaningful and digs a little deeper to make that connection.
Okay. So how is your work so different now with your business background to now be in this nonprofit sector where you make this strong connection to your work?
It's different in some ways and not different in others. The being the executive director, I love that role because I get to work with a broad spectrum of issues, financial performance, community education, marketing and branding, serving people, working with lots of volunteers, gaining funding. A lot of those things are very much an aspect of what I used to do in the for-profit sector. So in the technology company where we had many investors, here we have investors, but they're donors and they invest in a different way. But I guess the nicest part that's a little bit different is I just get to meet so many wonderful people. I get to connect with them from the heart, and I always find when I'm willing to speak about my most challenging experiences and my greatest pains, it just opens up other people to do the same, and I get to make new friends every day. I get to make new colleagues and professional associates that I have a much deeper level connection to than we sometimes do when we are so guarded and wear our hats in the business world every day, and I love that part of my job.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. So tell me about some of those moments that make it really worth it for you when you're working with kids or families that you feel like you have those big moments with.
Yeah. Well, the way our organization works, we provide support groups, ongoing support groups for kids and their caregivers and teens who come to us. It usually starts with an intake call. We get a lot of information. We figure out if what we have can help their family, and we also make referrals elsewhere if we do that, if that doesn't fit for them. And sometimes it's a combination. And then their starting point is to come to a family orientation, which we hold once a month. And that's where we really share the details of how we work. The kids get a chance to sample a support group so it doesn't feel so scary and they know what it's like. I talk to the parents about how we work, what our expectations are, what we might offer them. And all of our services are free, so we cover a whole lot of ground. But often it's a unique evening because it's probably one of the more challenging things I do, because I'm looking at a crowd of 70 people who are really, really in pain. And sometimes we are the first point of hope for those people. And I sat in those chairs, so I remember that. But when people leave, and I've taken the choice to expend myself in a very genuine way that's professional, what I find is they do feel their first point of hope, and that's an amazing thing to feel. We talk about that this place is a place that tears are okay. You can say the hard things that people might not be able to hear, because that's a real feeling and a valid one. But sometimes when they leave, they hug me, or they just say thank you for allowing this, thank you for giving us some possible hope in this world when we have none. And that's just an amazingly rewarding experience.
Yeah, no, I bet. And then, Sheree, switching gears a little bit, I know you wrote a book about this. How does that tie into your work?
Yeah, and I actually wrote it before I even came on the board at this organization, so interestingly, there was no formal connection at the time, although it's completely connected now. But I had the opportunity, it was another one of those that kind of came to me, but I had the opportunity to write a book about my experience, and at first I wasn't too sure that was anything I wanted to do. I was pretty sure it wasn't something I wanted to do, to relive that, but the idea was, it was part of my business to help people know about the work I did, but it was also to help people find a path forward when none seems apparent. And it's called Life from the Ashes, Finding Signs of Hope after loss. And I speak about our story in it, and that part is very raw and very real, because if you don't understand that piece, you can't understand the healing. But I talk about the healing pieces that came, and why those came, and how they were very unexpected. And when I say that, I want to be clear, you don't heal from traumatic loss of your child. So I'm not suggesting that, and I don't suggest that in the book, but there are ways to lead a life with more healing, and I speak about what those are. And I remember afterward, I really craved information. I craved books, and I wanted to read anything I possibly could to first figure out how this could possibly be real, and then to figure out why would anybody go on after that, and how could someone go on after that. And I found some really good information sort of immediately after, but I didn't find anything of how do you live a long life later for many decades after this of any value. And since my parents struggled so much without any support, I didn't have models of that. So it just became clear to me the book I was meant to write was one about how do you begin to do that. And it was inspired a lot by my son Connor. I have a very strong spiritual connection to him, which I had never experienced before. I don't know if I would have believed was real before I experienced it myself. But I talked a lot about that piece and how it motivated me to go forward, and how to find that and how to nurture that, and what that can mean in life. And I do have two amazing daughters here, so that was really important to me to try to find a way to not just survive and be a bitter victim, but how do I live as beautiful a life as I can when this pain never goes away. And it's a bit of a love story to my son as well as my daughters, because it's been a very long journey, but he's inspired me as much now since we lost him as he did in life. And that's a beautiful thing that other people have been able to find by reading my book. So it's on Amazon.com, it's on BarnesandNoble.com. People can buy it at any time. But also sometimes I just find many circumstances in my work where I'm speaking with someone and it's just what they need to read at the time, and I just give it to them because I think that's what it's meant to be.
As for continuing to improve the Grief Center, Sheree talked about trends in the nonprofit world as she may collaborate with another organization.
Basically, there's another organization that provides some support around loss, transition, and grief, and they provide it to a different group, and they provide some different ways. And we've had discussions recently about whether a joint venture might be beneficial. And the background of that is that there's a lot of support in the business community and the public sector for collaborative efforts between nonprofit organizations, because when we're asking communities to invest their resources to make their community better through our organizations, those investments need to be made as wisely as when you're investing them in a business that's growing. So we're exploring that. It's pretty exciting. I do not know the outcome yet, and I won't talk about it too much because we're in the early stages of it. But for me, I see many positives about it, because grief is grief, and loss is loss, and there are different sort of ways we manage that. What are the best services for kids? What are the best for adults? What are the best for, a widow or a widower? Those kinds of nuances. But just like a business, how we go about that that's just figuring out the best services given the group you're trying to support. What we do and the outcomes we seek are really similar, so there may be some great ability to expand our services and really have much more of a life cycle program for supporting bereavement and loss in people. And what we know, because we can talk about it more, we can look at it more as a society, we aren't as scared of making it public, is that when we support that for anybody at any age, the outcomes are so much better for the individual, for their family, and then how they contribute back to their community as better functioning individuals and better functioning families to make an economic difference and not compound it with more loss down the road.
As we wrapped up our conversation, Sheree wanted to give some more information for those who have experienced loss.
There's two things I want to share. As I said, there are over 300 organizations like ours across the country. We all work a little bit differently, but we do great work. So if you know a family who's in pain, if you know a family who needs help, you can just go to the National Alliance for Grieving Children website, and you can find state by state what support organizations are there. And most everybody who reaches out finds that they have a level of support that's so significant to them they might not have known about before. And if a family is struggling with trauma and loss, having a friend do that work for them is so helpful because they're not able typically to do that themselves. And if you can help a person get connected to one of those organizations, you will give them a great gift. So that was the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing is that we are building a new center here in New Mexico. We've been around for about 18 years, and our space is being sold, and we have made makeshift spaces work for a long time. So we're building a permanent home, but we're expanding it to a center for hope and healing. And it's something that will be a real contribution to our community as well as to the kids and the families we serve. So if anybody would like to learn more about that, we have some wonderful naming opportunities. We have people all across the country who could benefit from the work that we're doing and have some really neat plans. So I would love it if you'd hop on our website and contact me, and I'd love to talk about it to anybody who might be interested in learning more.
Sheree's job can sometimes be a difficult one, but one that is full of meaning and connection. We hope you're inspired by Sheree's story to use your experiences to help others too. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.